Hey everyone, welcome back to TrueNAS Tech Talk. Hope everybody enjoyed the break if you had it last week. I know we took some time off there. But today we'll be covering a couple of current events that we have. HexOS has officially launched the beta release of their software. RAIDZ expansion is getting a speed up, and Chris is going to go into great detail about a subject that lots of you have asked for, which is the history of TrueNAS, FreeBSD, OpenZFS, and how it all tied in with changing over to Linux.
Dun, dun, dun. It's going to be
good. Oh, boy. Just the first off, do we want to talk about, obviously, big news over Black Friday. HexOS launched their beta software. John and the team at Tech, we're really proud of them. They had a big showing on Linus Tech Tips WAN show, and I hear they had so much popularity that their email servers started to struggle. They got thousands of tickets. Their forums have exploded in popularity. So I imagine they're pretty busy over there. We've had some interest in HexOS on our own forums and our own community. It's definitely been an interesting journey to work alongside those guys and get this product launched. I mean, so a lot of people are asking, Chris, they say, what is IX's sort of participation in this? Because they say, isn't HexOS just TrueNAS? And it's much more than that.
Sure. Well, HexOS, again, this is a part of the IX partnership here. We're a part of this venture, just like Linus is. And it's really a way of bringing this whole powered by TrueNAS technology into the hands of more individuals, maybe different use cases, though. This isn't for the same kind of audience, right? This is maybe people who don't have ZFS experience, storage experience, or even Linux experience, but are I'd also like to try running a NAS in my home, and I just need it simple, and it just works, and it does all the hard decisions for me, which is great, but maybe not suitable for our enterprise type crowd. So again, it plays to its strengths, just like TrueNAS does, but hey, it's getting TrueNAS in more people's hands. I don't think everybody understands that fully, that it really is TrueNAS under the hood.
Absolutely. They even talk about that a bit in the video. They said it is TrueNAS, and if you want to get at the TrueNAS goodies, there's an option right in the HexOS dashboard to say, if you want to look at something that's beyond what HexOS has a layer for, hey, drop right into TrueNAS, make your changes here. As long as you haven't done anything that's going to conflict with the HexOS management on top of it, you can just jump back and forth between them anytime you like. And certainly for those who are looking at it as this is my great first foot into the world of OpenZFS and network attached storage, it's fantastic that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And they know their audience, and that's what it's for, right?
Exactly. And their audience is not the kind of person who has a stack of Supermicro rack mounts behind them sitting in the basement. It's, I'll be honest, I love your product, John. I love your, the HexOS guys, but it probably isn't for me because I'm the kind of person who, has, fiber running in his basement just for giggles and does that benchmark racing with solid state drives to see which one is fast. It's not for me, and that's fine. Because what it is it's OpenZFS and, a TrueNAS or a TrueNAS adjacent technology for everybody else. It gives everybody else. It's the true meaning of open source. Everybody has the potential to use this great technology, save your data, get it out of the hands of the cloud providers, and bring it back in-house where you can control it.
Absolutely. And because it is powered by TrueNAS, you have that kind of enterprise pedigree under the hood as well. So your data is going to be safe. It's intact, CFS, all that good stuff is still there. But there's nothing wrong with people if this is their entry into kind of this whole ecosystem. Not everyone's going to be quite the uber geek that many of us are. And, an enterprise product, you can only simplify it so far before you lose all the enterprisiness bits out of it. So obviously we have our space and they have theirs. And congrats again, John and Eric and the team, you guys on HexOS. We've been watching this and participating for a while behind the scenes. So congrats on the awesome launch. That was really exciting to see.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And again, with it being based on OpenZFS and TrueNAS, then of course, in the spirit of open source and collaboration, they get to benefit from every kind of change that comes into OpenZFS and TrueNAS. One of those being, of course, lately, it's been the RAIDZ expansion. Everybody's been saying, hey, I've been putting one drive in at a time. I've got all this new space. It was so much easier than having to find a way to shoehorn another, 3, 4, 6, 8 drives in. But the one thing that we are hearing a bit, Chris, is that putting the single drive in at a time it's pretty slow. People are saying, hey, why isn't this something that happens instantly? Why can't I get all of that capacity? What's taking so long? So I know that there's been a great new change that IX Systems and the TrueNAS team has put a lot of work into and helped create. So we're doing a bit of a performance update. So if you want to maybe talk about some of the details on this, Chris, for a technically minded crowd, I think they're really going to be happy when this lands.
I'll have to actually pull it up here, and I think we're going to show the link to the OpenZFS pull request, which,
Absolutely.
by the way, if you don't know, you should be keeping an eye on the OpenZFS repo if you're kind of a GitHub-inclined person. There's a lot of interesting things there. But I'll pull a link up here in the background so we can talk about it. But specifically, this is the performance improvement in tuning we were hoping to see happen here in the near future. This came from one of the IX contributors here, Alexander. Thank you. Great work on this. And the cool thing is it just did get approval as of yesterday by Brian Bellendorf, one of the OpenZFS maintainers as well. But specifically, it switches to copying much more data at once, much more contiguous data. And I haven't gone through all the technical details. It's not right in front of me. But specifically, it does seem that it allows us to reach write rate speeds on both HDD and SSD systems now as well. So if you're not really limited by CPU like we were before, so if you have a fast SSD you're expanding onto, I think Mav said he was hitting between 6 and 12 gigabyte a second rates on some of his internal systems. So that's really good to see. I don't know if you've looked into more of the details, Chris.
Yeah, I looked into it. It's using, as you said, the larger copy ranges, so it doesn't have to do that sort of back and forth on smaller chunks with the processor. We're basically able to just say, hey, instead of trying to ferry this load back and forth in a small pickup truck, now we've got, the 26-foot hauler. We can take way more data at a time. We can read from way more disks at a time. And it's just sort of going to be basically limited by the speed of your drives now, not any other external bottleneck.
It just moves the bottleneck, which is what you want. If the drive can only go so fast, that's as fast as you're going to be able to expand. We can only write at the rate that the drive's going to allow. So that seems to have solved the issues folks have had wondering why it was artificially slow. And I expect we'll see that landing in Fangtooth in the upcoming release of TrueNAS. Again, it's going to get a little bit more testing and time upstream, but then we'll be seeing that here in the release coming up in April, betas in February. So if folks want to test it early, they can definitely do that. And thank you, Brian, for getting the review on that done quickly, because I think a lot of folks wanted to see this speed up land fast.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you are having some issues and you think that it's even slow, given that we do have some limitations now, go ahead, drop down into the forums there, drop onto our Reddit, ask us the question there, ask the community the question to say, hey, does this look right? Should it be this slow? Because I've seen some people who posted numbers that were like 4 to 5 megabytes a second on some pretty beefy systems. When I looked into it, it would turn out there was another bottleneck that was in place. So don't necessarily make the assumption that this is just kind of the way it is. Have a look, have the community sort of review and see if there's maybe something that needs to be tuned, tweaked. Maybe there's another bottleneck you can lift. And if you can get a 10 times speed up right now, then that'll be beneficial even before this much larger speed up lands later.
Absolutely. I think that was a tunable we saw on the forums as well.
There's some tunables in there.
Yeah.
One of the people, it was actually, they had the write caches disabled on their drives. So
ouch.
It didn't just improve their RAIDZ expansion speed, it massively uplifted the overall performance of their NAS. And they said, I'm capping out my line rates now because they were on 2.5 gig Ethernet. They said,
fantastic.
I was only able to get a 100 megs a second or so before. Now I'm just walling out my network line. And that's the fun thing about bottlenecks is once you find them, then you go, well, so now he says, well, now I'm capping out by 2.5. Should I upgrade to 10?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it goes. You find the weakest link, you fix that link, and you go, well, now my network's holding me down. I should upgrade to 10 gig. Then he might look at that and he's going, oh, my disks are slowing me down at around 600-700 meg a second. Maybe I need some more disks. Oh, I need some more disks.
It is a never-ending battle of how can I squeeze more performance out of this? And it
Absolutely.
goes back and forth between the networking, then back to the drives, and now I'm CPU bound somewhere. Guess what? I'm memory bound.
at some point, you become wallet bound for a lot of us, and that's the challenging part to overcome.
Absolutely.
But
it's fun. It's fun to be in that race and enjoy and see what kind of performance you can get out of your system, especially if you built it yourself. That's always
it's a point of pride. It's like building or tuning a car yourself. You go, hey, it's something that I did. I helped build this. I helped create this. I helped make it faster.
Well, speaking of more powerful things and kind of new shiny, what have we got here about GPUs going on?
Yeah, I'm sure some of you who are following in the tech space probably noticed that Intel announced their latest line of GPUs, the Intel Battlemage or B series ARC cards. Now, the key is that those are going to require the Linux 6.12 kernel. And if you recall the last episode, Chris mentioned that we actually had just merged that 6.12 kernel into the next version of TrueNAS, that being TrueNAS Fangtooth or 2504. And that is available in the Nightlies right now. So if any of you out listening either managed to get a Battlemage card early, like the B580, B570, or you're planning on picking one up just to experiment with, please, by all means, give it a test. Let us know if it's going to work out for you well, if your transcoding is working in whether it's Plex, MB, Jellyfin, or if you're doing anything else with like a machine learning context.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about them, especially just to have sort of that third player in the GPU market between NVIDIA and AMD.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to see this. And again, there's more than just the kernel support. That's definitely the first step, but we want to make sure the userland bits work. There's not any additional firmware blobs or binaries we need to update. So if you have access to the hardware, please test it. Drop us a note, drop something in the forums. Let us know if you have success or not, or if we need to go continue to investigate further. But excited to get this into people's hands. I may have to pick one up myself, Chris. I had a little adventure over the Thanksgiving break where I converted my Windows gaming desktop to Linux and run Steam on that now. And that's a whole other story for another day. But I'm severely tempted maybe to pick up a Battlemage and couple it with that.
Well, you can see in the background there, you can see I've got the box for an Intel Arc card. It's a A750 limited edition, and I bought it specifically to test out with transcoding and TrueNAS. So I'm probably going to be picking up another one. I might wait for the maybe the smaller, less power-hungry series. Maybe they'll do the B310. Okay. I know a lot of our users in the forums are really happy with the A310s, those small half-height cards.
That's what I have right now for testing in my TrueNAS.
Perfect. They're really great. This stream is not sponsored by Intel, but we do enjoy their products at times.
Well, I have an NVIDIA 4070 in my gaming rig, but again, I'm tempted. I might throw a Battlemage in there and try. And for anybody who asks, yes, I know you get less games on the Linux Steam version, but Deadlock works, so I'm happy. That's kind of my jam at the moment.
Okay. But
speaking of the nightlies, by the way, I should mention also the apps UI has been fixed back up. The nightlies are starting to get into pretty decent shape, and will continue to do so over the next month or so, in the March to the beta in February. But another interesting thing is we had our really big merge of the initial LXC container support, which is in the UI now. And that's pretty darn functional. You can browse different Linux distros. You can, with a couple clicks, add them, bring up the shell, configure. Let's see, we added Mac VLAN for that, so you can get a DHCP given IP address on the LXC containers. Quite nice. Obviously, it's early, so please help test, find bugs, report issues. Like, that's part of the process, and we appreciate everyone who does that.
Definitely. If there's more than just, the GPU reasons or the apps reasons to test out the latest nightlies. It's just a matter of sort of seeing what's coming and being able to sort of shape the future of TrueNAS as it goes. We have our feature request category in the forum. If you're testing out something that's in 2504 in a very early stage in the nightlies, it's a great spot to say, hey, I'm looking at this in 2504. File in a feature request and say, I know this isn't likely to land in our current one. I'm looking at this for that new revision. Maybe there's still time for things to be scoped in and looked at, maybe not Fangtooth, but even Goldeye.
Absolutely.
Help give us that early feedback. Help change the shape of TrueNAS into what you want to use it for most.
Which, a little bit behind the scenes on how we do this, we actually start scoping some of the next release around the time we hit beta of the current release. So that is about the right time to be saying, hey, I'm looking at it, I'm trying things out. It'd be really nice if XYZ was added, or if we could do these things. That's perfect, because that means we can now talk about it internally here, get it on the roadmap for the next upcoming release. So please do send those requests.
Absolutely. Hey, speaking of you moved your gaming system to Linux, that's a great segue to talk about moving other things to Linux.
No,
and
that wasn't intentional, but that worked.
It works for me. We've had a lot of questions in the forums, on social media, even internally within the company, that's saying, hey, what drove this shift to Linux? And I know you've got quite a bit that you could say on this. And we don't want to make it another super double length episode, but let's dig into this a little bit. Can you give us some history about kind of where we started and where we're going?
Yeah, this might be an ongoing series, I guess. I call it TrueNAS History Tidbits, so we might do this multiple times, but I'll try and give you at least a big chunk of it today if I can, and whet your appetite for future conversation. But some of the early thoughts about Linux kind of happened in the mid-2010s, I want to say, maybe 2015, 16, kind of around that time frame. And there was a lot of reasons for it, and I'll try and walk you guys through some of the different thoughts and how that process went. But we had all been BSD developers here at IX for a long time, myself personally, and most of the other developers here. And we weren't really oblivious to the fact that BSD development tended to be a little more slow and conservative. That was something we even talked about and touted. Like that was a feature, not a bug, we'd like to say. But we were also mindful of the fact that there were just a lot of things we had to wait for on the BSD side. It took time for things to kind of trickle down in the BSD stack. And by that, what I mean is a lot of the innovation always was happening on Linux first. And by innovation, I mean new features in kernel, new things for, X11, new drivers, new software packages that had to go get added to the FreeBSD ports tree. There was a lot less of that taking place natively on BSD, and always that was coming from the Linux side and then eventually landed in BSD, right? It was kind of a catching up mindset, like, oh, what should we go get next, or what should we bring in next? And we were aware of that. And again, it worked for the most part for a while. But at some point, you can only play that catch-up game for so long. This was really underscored by the ZFS on Linux project, though. That's what really kicked it into overdrive and got us thinking. So, little history here, and I know you have some history with this too, Chris, is OpenZFS, of course, came out of the old Sun days, Solaris, right? And then when Oracle came in, and I don't know if this happened right before Oracle or after, but they ended up forking it off, and now we had OpenZFS started, which, of course, was spearheaded on the Open Solaris side of things. So I'd have to go back and check the numbers. I'm getting old enough now, I can't remember the dates off the top of my head, but it was early, right? And then eventually it got ported into FreeBSD. I still remember Pavel, one of the first talks he gave at BSDCan one year about, hey, here's this ZFS thing, which is really cool on Solaris and really cool on Open Solaris. And guess what? I've got a FreeBSD port of it. And we're like, oh, this is interesting and neat. What is this, right? So that's cool. And I think you probably were involved at that stage, right, Chris?
Yeah, I was actually involved back in the Open Solaris stage. That was my first exposure to ZFS, was back on Open Solaris. So I started with it there. I was a big fan of, I used a lot of the Comstar target. I did a lot of fiber channel back in those days. And then FreeBSD, obviously, I jumped in when I saw that there was the availability of it on FreeNAS at the time. I had been using FreeNAS prior to the introduction of ZFS to it, because I actually jumped on FreeNAS back in like .64, I want to say.
Okay, yep.
And then when IX Systems came on board with the 8.0 and said, we have ZFS now, I looked at it and I went, well, that's that same, like, basically indestructible file system that I'm using at the office, and I can get this in my house. I want to get in on this.
Absolutely. And that was kind of the renaissance, right? For FreeBSD, there was that brief renaissance time where it was like, oh, the ZFS thing, like, just breathed a lot of new life into the project, and even some innovation was coming out of it.
Yeah. And I admit that when ZFS on Linux started showing up, I was initially skeptical, because I went, it was very, very early days. There were a lot of features that weren't there. And I admit, for the longest time, there were a lot of Linux users of ZFS looking jealously at me because, on FreeBSD, I had things like functional trim support for solid state drives. I don't remember exactly what version it was when that got merged, but that was a huge day for them when they said, hey, we have functioning trim support. And that's when I went, okay, well, now I'm definitely intrigued. And I think that was around, like you said, around that 2014, 2015 time frame.
It was around that time frame. And again, there was this brief glimmer of hope and this nice window where we saw kind of like, oh, FreeBSD looks like it might be leading the charge on some of these ZFS things going forward. But as things have gone with other projects, ZFS on Linux started slow, but then it quickly gained momentum, right? And we started seeing all the rapid move of innovation on the ZFS and Linux project. And at the end of the day, it was just, there was far more developers. And, kudos to Brian Bellendorf and the folks who made that project happen. But all of a sudden, things like native encryption start getting added. And now all of us BSD guys are looking, going, why don't we have that in ours? Oh, nobody's ported it, or BSD doesn't have this or that. And we were back in the same mode again. That's just one example. There were others.
Yeah, special VDEVs probably was another big
special VDEVs.
That was something that there were some proprietary forks of ZFS back in the day that made a lot of noise about having those, and they certainly were very helpful. And then all of a sudden, OpenZFS said, "Hey, we're going to have those too." And again, that brought a whole lot more eyes onto it, to going, well, this is going to be like, this is a serious file system going on here. There's an awful lot of development and innovation, and that was that, like I said, that brought an even bigger crowd into it.
It absolutely did. But around, again, that 2015-16 timeframe, we saw yet again, though, we ended up in this catch-up mode. We were like, okay, well, these guys are innovating, new, exciting, cool things that are kind of pushing the ball forwards happening upstream, and maybe we'll bring that in at some point, right? And that's a tough place to be. You can't be in that catch-up mode forever. But we started to see this trend in even more critical parts of the tool chain. It wasn't just OpenZFS. That was a huge part of it. And I've talked at length in other forums about some of the history on how IX took on the effort to unify ZFS on Linux and the FreeBSD OpenZFS, because they did diverge for a while. They were not compatible for some time. There were certain features that were enabled on the Linux side that you couldn't import a pool on the BSD side. So we undertook that effort as part of this whole Linux conversion to make those things one again, which was great and super important, and glad we did it. But there's something a lot of other folks don't realize, or I guess think about. Maybe if you're a developer, you know this, but a lot of folks probably just have never given it a thought. But there's a trend on other third-party products and parts of the tool chain that TrueNAS was relying on. They're all developed on Linux natively. So I could speak to some of those. Python, for example. Okay, we'd run into random Python bugs on FreeBSD, which just by nature of it, it has a smaller user base. We're the ones running into it and having to go fix it, and they're BSD-specific things, right? But there's a lot more packages that we are dependent on, things like Samba, for one. You'd have to go through and look at the package list now, what's in a current TrueNAS core and scale system. It's pretty extensive. People sometimes have the wrong assumption that, it's just BSD or Linux, whatever that means. I'm not sure. Your definition may vary. But really, it's a gazillion other components that make that up. Things on how we build node packages for the web UI even. Like all of a sudden, we were in this situation, and we had been there for a while, where we're realizing that not only do we have to fix bugs that are in the products themselves, the bugs that are present on Linux, but then we have another layer of bugs that we have to investigate, fix, and deal with ourselves that come from the porting process, because we're essentially taking a Linux native thing and running it in its non-native environment. And I don't mean native as in POSIX versus not. I mean like the principal developers of these projects, build, test, and have most of their users on Linux. And we were the oddballs sending, hey, we're the BSD guys here. Could you please fix this bug? And they're like, I don't have any BSD systems. What are you talking about? Like, that's on you.
Exactly. It's kind of sometimes that developer situation of, well, it works on my machine and my machine's Linux. So
no problem here.
If you can't replicate something, it's incredibly difficult to troubleshoot it.
Absolutely it is. But that means, we have a product, we have an enterprise product, you have things you have to do. I mean, it's not acceptable just to say, sorry, that's just going to be broke forever. We're on the hook. We have to fix it. So, a lot of folks don't realize there was a lot of effort and time put into chasing those kinds of issues. And so since there are such a large number of dependencies on third-party ported applications, at some point it just made it kind of a natural fit for us to say, you know what? Why aren't we running these in the native environment? I have to make a decision. Am I going to spend developer time and resources and money go chasing bugs that only exist because of the kernel we happen to run or the OS we happen to run? Or can I take that same effort if we run in a native environment and put it towards innovation as opposed to just the catch-up mindset that we had been in for a long time in many ways? So that made it easy. That was kind of the decision. That was the genesis of the thought of, maybe we should consider this. As much as we hated it, believe me, it would have been easier to stay on BSD because that was where we were from. It was our roots, our history. That's what we knew. It was kind of like having to relearn a lot of things again. Fortunately, it wasn't that different, but you know what I mean. Like even distro hopping can be a little jarring at times.
I mean, even from our community base, I know for me, I had to relearn a whole series of different commands just to get some basic stats and metrics. And I'm still learning on how to get the right things that I want, tease them out of ZFS on Linux sometimes.
Absolutely. And then the other thing to mention, though, too, is a lot of folks always brought up the license, which was true. There was a little bit of the license boogeyman. We were a BSD shop, and BSD license versus GPL. There's a whole conversation you can have about copyright versus copyleft. I know I gave many of those talks over the years at different Linux conferences around the world. That was fun, but it ended up being a non-issue when we actually thought about it. And the reason is TrueNAS is an open source product. And while the BSD license has appeal for the simplicity, honestly, one of the biggest strengths that we didn't like talking about on the BSD side was that you can take something and close source it at any time.
Well, we can talk about it now because we didn't close source it. We actually did something completely different.
We did something different. That was, again, we looked at it and said, well, we have no intention of closed sourcing this, so I'm not even getting the benefit of having the BSD license, right? We want to keep this open source. We believe in open source. And as of this last year, we actually relicensed some of the middleware and the UI, all the bits that we really control and run. Those are now GPL v3 or LGPL v3, depending on which repo you go look at, because we wanted to stay in the spirit of ensuring it stays open. So again, it was not a huge benefit for us. I could go into a long tirade about maybe this is ultimately one of the things that hurt some BSD innovation in the past. Was there was a lot of corporations who I won't name today who took a lot of BSD code and then chose to close it and never give anything back, which I'm sure did stifle some innovation, stifle some forward progress, because that meant now the community had to go and implement that thing yet again because some other company had it but opted to not open source it because they weren't required to by the license. Again, it's a strength, but at the same time, that can also have a knock-on effect of it might stifle some forward progress innovation. And now you have to reinvent a wheel that a company's already paid millions of dollars perhaps inventing in the first place, that if they had done it on a GPL software and released it, it may have been able to benefit the community.
Yeah, so again, I have no idea why the OpenZFS community in particular might be very license shy for historical reasons. I'm sure there's no background at all on that one that would fill another episode.
Sure. Like I said, we can get into another episode on that. These are good topics, so I think these will probably get peppered in throughout future episodes, and we'll want to talk about them, and it's good. And I will just throw tack on here, Chris. We did have some obviously early concerns about mixing the CDDL OpenZFS license with the GPL, the Linux kernel license. But, we did it the right way, and we did it the way most Linux products and distros have been doing for many, many years now, which is you ship them as modules. They're not compiled in. They're not part of the same kernel source. So you're not really polluting or, crossing the stream, so to speak. They are two separate entities, and we build them and ship them that way. You don't see that, of course, in the product. You just boot it, and it boots up and does its thing, and ZFS just works, and that's the way we intend it. But, again, it wasn't really a deal breaker for us to go and be able to build a Linux product and still bring all of our ZFS heritage and features and enhancements all with us.
Yeah. Well, thanks for all the background there. I mean, I love hearing it, and it's funny. It sort of mirrors that same path that I took from Solaris up to BSD up to Linux, and I imagine there's quite a few of those out there. And if that's, the path you've taken with ZFS, if you have a history, we'd like to hear from you. Drop it in the comments, send us an email at our email address, t3@truenas.com. And on that subject of sending us questions, we actually picked up a question. I don't know if we'll necessarily answer it this time, but we want to use it to spark some discussion here and maybe kind of an informal, poll and feel for the community. So it is a big one, and we will get back to our thoughts on this in another week for sure. But this question comes in from Brian Moses from our community. He says, so, hey, Kris and Chris, I'm sure the two of you have already brainstormed this idea, but I'd love to see you guys talk about the use of ECC RAM along with ZFS, especially if it's debunking the tribal knowledge that ECC is somehow a requirement for using ZFS that gets thrown out there at folks so frequently in this community.
Well, so, I'll just right there just say it's not a requirement, but yes, we should have a whole longer discussion about this, pros and cons and all that good stuff.
Absolutely. We can have ourselves a little debate on this one, a little devil's advocate play sometimes, and we'll decide who's the devil.
Yeah, well, we can take turns. It's fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll do a little sparring match of ECC versus not. But yes, there's definitely, we'll say, some very strong opinions about which way this debate should lean. And there is a lot of knowledge that might not be completely accurate about what is and isn't sort of required in the sense of ECC.
Excellent. Well, looking forward to that, Brian. Thanks for teeing us up for the next episode. That's going to be a fun conversation to have, and probably long overdue, frankly.
Absolutely. So by all means, if you have your own thoughts on this, make sure we politely discuss them in the comments below. Jump into the TrueNAS community forums. We'll see that there. Probably Chris and I will both be waiting for that discussion on ECC versus not, and we'll be happy to participate. And we'll probably, like we said, we'll come back to that as a major topic of discussion.
You know what? I'm just going to call something here. Why don't we do a little poll on the forums before the next episode so we can report on it? That'd be fun.
That sounds like a great idea.
Go post that here. ECC or no ECC, fight, vote.
Yeah. What are you running, and what do you wish you were running?
That's right.
Let's go for it. All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in today. As always, feel free to submit your questions in, whether it's about ECC or not, or any other subject, to t3@truenas.com. Drop us a message in the comment section below. And please don't forget to like the video, subscribe so that you don't miss our next episode. And Kris and Chris will see you next time.
Have fun. We'll see you soon.